welcome listeners to another episode of Listen, Learn, and Love, hosted by Richard Osler. My guest on today's podcast, joining me via Zoom, is my kind of long-term friend, Blake Muir. Welcome to the podcast, Blake.
Richard, thank you so much for having me today.
Blake is somebody that I've been interacting with. We had a phone call several years ago, and we've been on friends on Facebook for a long time. I never reached out to Blake and said, would he like to share his story as a gay Latter-day Saint? But then our common friend, Nathan Campbell, messaged me a few months ago and said, you should have Blake Muir on the podcast. And prior to that, Chad Ford up at Utah State, where you are, just mentioned to me what a good man you are and he didn't say get him on the podcast, but he just reminded me of what a good man you are. And so I reached out to Blake and I said, Blake, would you be willing to be on the podcast? And he said he would. And here we are. So that's sometimes how this happens. And if you'd like to be on the podcast, especially if you're an LGBTQ Latter-day Saint, DM me on social media. My email's in the show notes, and we'll work to get you on the podcast. But just a little bit about Blake. He's 33. He grew up in Southern Oregon as well as Cache Valley. That's an area in northern Utah near Utah State. He is a Utah State Aggie, third generation. He's sorry, I can't say that word, Blake. Tell us what major you had.
Oh, that's okay. My degree was in sociology.
Sociology. He served a mission in Denver, Colorado South from 2013, 2015. He's been employed in several areas since graduating from Utah State at Utah State in the history department, and most recently is the manager of the box office for arts. He is, as he's going to share his story about being gay, he's someone who holds a lot of the same theological beliefs as traditional Latter-day Saints, probably is not attending his ward, hasn't closed down that door completely, but just making his way forward as a gay Latter-day Saint in the best way he can. And just visiting with Blake, and we said a prayer before we started. This is a really good man who's walked a really complicated road with integrity and courage and honesty, and has gone through some suicidal ideation. He may talk about that. And I just got the feeling that Blake is his personal best right now. And this is the best time to have him on the podcast, especially for younger LGBTQ folks to hear the hope in Blake's story. And for us as allies or parents or local leaders wanting to support good men like Blake, Blake is going to talk about some difficult church experiences that's pretty normal for LGBTQ Latter-day Saints. Neither of us do that to tear the church down, but when we know better, we do better. I wish I'd listened to someone like Blake 20 years ago. I would have not made some of the mistakes I've made supporting LGBTQ Latter-day Saints. So is that okay for an introduction, Blake?
This was perfect, Richard. Thank you so much. And you were so gracious in everything you said. So thank you very, very much. And I hope you know that the feeling goes towards you as well.
Very kind. Blake is super prepared, so he's going to spend the next 45 minutes to an hour just sharing his story, and I'm going to get out of the way, and it's a beautiful framing. I'm going to let him talk about it. No one's ever kind of talked about their story the way that Blake is going to frame it. Super thoughtful, super original. So with that, I'll turn it over to Blake.
Thank you so much again, Richard. And when I began creating my story, when I began sort of putting the notes together of putting this together, I often joke with my friends that I belong to the Church of Musical Theater of Latter-day Saints, and that we theater lovers out there are very we have a really phenomenal way of storytelling, and so I have broken down my story into sections based off of songs from various musicals that have touched my heart in various ways. So I want to kind of introduce myself just a little bit further with my personal favorite song, "Any Dream Will Do" from Andrew Lloyd Webber's Joseph in the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat. The song begins with Joseph singing, "I closed my eyes, drew back the curtain to see for certain what I thought I knew. Far, far away, someone was weeping. but the world was sleeping. Any dream will do. I introduced this as kind of the beginning of my life, because I first and foremost first discovered musical theater at the Provo Center Theater in the early 90s. I was probably about 4 or 5 years old, and we went and saw a production of Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat. It was this tiny little theater, and they stacked the play with references from Austin Powers to the Spice Girls to just this incredible story. And I remember very early on seeing that play, it opening this door to me of musical theater, and specifically was a way that spoke to me, but more than really anything ever has in my life. I very very deeply am a lover of all things theater, and so Joseph was my introduction. Why I specifically chose these lyrics is, it makes me think of the life that I saw for myself. From a very young age, my parents divorced when I was about a year old, and my father got remarried, and as did my mother. And I have three brothers and three sisters from my parents' second marriages. And I'm very, very lucky. I have incredible siblings and I have incredible parents who I have a very close relationship with. And it's been wonderful because given my journey, I've been able to maintain that close relationship with my family, and we're all learning and we're all growing together. I'll get into that a little bit more in my story, but just from a very early age, I was, a young man who found faith in God very young. And I loved primary as a kid. I loved singing time in primary. I loved just that aspect of community, and was very happy. The second section of my story is "Put on Your Sunday Clothes" from the musical Hello, Dolly. The lyrics go, "Put on your Sunday clothes when you feel down and out. Strut down the street and have your picture took. Dressed like a dream, your spirits seem to turn around. That Sunday shine is a certain sign that you feel as fine as you look." Like I said, from a very early stance, or from a very early stage, I had a testimony. I remember when I was about 13 years old, my family had the missionaries over. Around that same time period, there was a video that was circling around. It was not specifically produced by the church. My understanding is I believe it was made by a group of missionaries. And the video was played to the song "Healing Waters" by Michelle Toombs, and it showed a video of a young man who discovers a Book of Mormon from a girl in his class. And he reads the Book of Mormon, and he ends up being baptized into the LDS Church. Like I said, I believe I was about 13 years old when I saw this video. And I distinctly remember that was the first time I ever experienced a testimony of the power of the Book of Mormon. And I, at that time, began to really delve into my religious convictions. I really began to take church seriously. I really began to pray. I began to read the Book of Mormon every single night around that time. And for me at that time, it was very important to me. Um, I was very lucky to be given the opportunity to serve in a variety of different callings that I felt gave me an opportunity to serve others. From being the president of my deacons quorum and priest quorum. I'm sorry, not president of the priest quorum, but the first assistant to the bishop in the priest quorum. And I also was blessed to be the president of our seminary program at my high school. These were all things that were very important to me, and I loved them very much, and especially at that young age, those were some very defining moments for me, and especially in my relationship with my Father in heaven, and learning how to rely on the Spirit. Um, the third section of my story that I want to break down is Yorktown from the musical Hamilton. The line specifically that I want to focus on is the world turned upside down. Um, like I've kind of already alluded to, I was very happy in the church. I was very easily converted. I enjoyed the social aspects of the church. I enjoyed the principles of the gospel. These were all things that were very, very important to me. Around the same time that I really began to kind of feel strong in the church was when I began to first question my sexuality. Um, Around the time I entered middle school was the first time questions of sexuality even really began to show up in my life. I remember I was in seventh grade, the very first time someone harassed me and approached me about my sexuality. I was at that point in time not even aware of what being gay meant. But I just remember, it was very obvious to everyone. You've got a teenage boy who, more than anything, wants to sing music from the musical Wicked. And I guess that was a lot more obvious than I realized. And so I began at that time to begin to really question, what was my sexuality, and where am I at with all of this? And in 2008, I was in a musical review show through a local teens musical theater organization in Southern Oregon. And I remember I was alone in the boys' dressing room one night, and everyone had already left to go do other things, getting ready for the show. And it was the first time I looked myself in the mirror, and I remember it was kind of the first time that it really hit me.
Mm,
And I said the words verbally out loud to myself, I'm gay.
wow.
Up until that point, I don't even think my brain allowed myself to fully form the sentence. The second the words would even begin to form, it was like my brain instantly had this lock in place that was like, we're not even going to think that, we're not even going to address that. But rather, it was the first time in my life that I allowed the words to be said, and I really began to acknowledge maybe this is who I am. I went on to perform the show that night um, with a newfound level of heaviness.
Mm,
Um, one thing that is talked a lot about on your podcast, Richard, is sort of that shame that so many of us instantly feel when we first begin to question this aspect of ourselves. Unfortunately, there is a unspoken cultural norm that sort of has become, specifically in my teenage years, of you don't want to have a gay child, you don't want to be the gay person in a ward, you don't want to be, these various things. And despite very loving friends and despite a very loving family, there was still that level of shame attached to so much of that identity. And at this point in time, I was very convinced that this was something I was going to take to my grave. I was never going to tell anyone, and this was going to be my little secret. Um, the next section of my story comes from the song Papa, Can You Hear Me? From the musical Yentl,
mm,
starring our queen, Barbara Streisand.
mhm,
Um, and the reason I choose this song specifically is Yentl's conversation with both God and her father, who has died at this point in the story, really struck a chord with me. The begging and the pleading I began to experience with God. Yentl sings in the play, God, our Heavenly Father, O God and my Father, who also is in heaven. May the light of this flickering candle illuminate the night the way your spirit illuminates my soul. Papa, can you hear me? Papa, can you see me? Papa, can you find me in the night? Papa, are you near me? Papa, can you hear me? Papa, Papa, can you help me not be frightened? I remember during this time, my prayers became very begging and very desperate. I was terrified, and I was convinced at this point in time that there was no shot that I was going to make it to the celestial kingdom. And I became very convinced that for my own specific journey, I needed to prove to God that I was enough and that my soul was worth saving. I was convinced that by nature I was this inherently evil, horrible being who needed to prove to God that, you know what, I'm worth saving because this being that I inherently am is evil and needs to be destroyed.
Mm.
So often, you hear people talk about queer Latter Day Saints in this type of dialogue. Someday you will be fixed. Someday you can overcome this. This is your trial in this life to carry, and it's very degrading. It's very, while I believe well-meaning, I don't think people understand just how harmful that perspective of viewing queer Latter Day Saints is, because we learn from a very young age that we are broken and need to be fixed. And while I will never refer to myself as broken anymore, there was a long time where I believed that about myself. There was a long time where I was convinced that I could not do anything right. I came out to my first bishop around this same time period.
Mm.
I was about 15 years old. And again, a very well meaning bishop who I truly believe did not know how to handle this situation. He gave me a copy of Spencer W. Kimball's The Miracle of Forgiveness.
Ouch.
That book is painful. It led me at that time to a very dark and depressed stage. And I attempted suicide my senior year of high school. My attempt was according to my therapist, an attempt that showed a need to be seen and a need to call out for help. And I'm very grateful that I was not successful in that attempt. I'm very grateful that, given the life that I now have, at that time, the hopelessness did not overcome me. Over the next several years, I began to do everything I could to try and just be the best person I could be. Again, just try and prove to God that there was a reason to save me and that there was a reason that I was on this earth. Um, Following high school graduation, everyone began to ask me about a mission. That was the next step that was required of me. And I remember very much not believing there was even a possibility that I would be able to serve a mission. I was convinced that if I even shared that I dealt with same sex attraction, that the church would be like, no, you can't serve a mission because you'll be a danger to the other missionaries. And that was just, again, the verbiage that I had heard from so many people over time. The summer after I graduated high school, my father sat me down and had me read his journal from his mission.
Mm.
My father served his mission in Milan, Italy, and I sat down, and I don't even think I got 3 entries into his journal before I broke down sobbing. and realized very clearly that at that point in time, this was a thing that I needed to do. And it felt very clear to me that serving a mission was the next step in my journey. So the next section of my life about my mission, rather than read the lyrics, I just will tell everyone. Some people may be offended by this song, but I'm going to tell you right now, if you need a good laugh, listen to the song "Hello" from the Book of Mormon musical. It is a very on the nose joke about a missionary's door approach. The line that makes me laugh the hardest: you see an elder get down on his hands and knees and smile obnoxiously and look at a family. Are these your kids? And anyone who knew Elder Muir in the Colorado Denver South mission will tell you that was me through and through. So I began to fill out my mission papers. And I had a very wonderful stake president who, when I was filling out the paperwork and it asked, was there anything I felt like the brethren needed to know as I was getting a mission call, I felt very strongly like I needed to share about my same sex attraction. And I had a stake president who sort of dove into everything with me and was trying to help me figure things out as best as he could. Around that same time, the LDS Living magazine produced a issue where they interviewed Ty Mansfield, a queer Latter Day Saint in a mixed orientation marriage, who was my understanding, psychology professor at Brigham Young University. I say that Ty Mansfield is one of my greatest heroes, because he was the first person I had ever heard of. Ty wrote a book in quiet desperation and specifically really deeply delved into the psychology of being queer, and also having faith in Jesus Christ. And at that time, I didn't know about his book, but I did read his article in LDS Living. It was my dirty magazine that I hid under my pillow in my room and read in secret because I didn't want anyone to know how interested in this article I was. Um, Around that same time period, the church also released mormonsandgays.org for the very first time. And again, Ty shared his story on that article. I'm sorry, on that website. And when my family was gone, and I had the house to myself, I would get on our computer and I'd go onto that website and I'd read the articles and I'd browse. And it was like for the first time in my life, I began to experience hope that maybe there was a way to be queer and Mormon. And it was a very emotional time for me. I was required by the church before I could receive a mission call to go to 5 therapy sessions with LDS Family Services. The therapist I went to was a very good man, and he opened my eyes to sexuality in a way that I had never even considered. And there was never condemning, there was never shame. Instead, the entire 5 sessions I had with him were very helpful and hopeful. He gave me hope so that when I did get my mission call, I was convinced I could do it. Um, so then I went on my mission, and I'm going to be honest, my mission overall was a very wonderful experience in my life. And I will say there are parts of my mission that I hold with absolute sacredness and I'm so proud of, whilst also feeling a very deep amount of shame connected to certain aspects of my mission, specifically the ways that I treated people and the ways that I dealt with queer people on my mission. I came into contact with several queer investigators on my mission, and not having any other way to handle things, I deferred to the handbook on everything. And one of the moments that I hold a lot of regret towards on my mission was there was a lesbian couple that my companion and I taught very early on in my mission. And one of the women had been raised Christian. I believe she was Southern Baptist, if I'm remembering correctly. And the other woman, as far as I know, was agnostic, just never had a religious background. The agnostic woman ended up finding a lot of comfort in the Bible and wanted to be baptized. And my companion and I did the only thing that we knew how to do. We told her unless her and her partner split up, there was no chance that she could be baptized. This is something I look back on now and I just feel sad. I feel so sad that that was how I handled the situation. And I felt so sad because at that point in time, that is what the handbook told us to say. We could not baptize someone that was in a same sex relationship, and missionaries couldn't even interview them for baptism. They had to be interviewed by our mission president to show that they had truly repented of their sin. Um, I served an honorable full time mission and came home very, very proud of what I had done. Um, and in the fall of 2015, moved to Logan, Utah to begin college. So, like Richard said, I'm a third generation Utah State Aggie. My great uncle, Stan Kazare, was the president of Utah State in the 80s. And so my family, bleed as about as Utah State blue family possibly can. My mother, my father, and my stepfather are all Utah State graduates. I have a sister who is currently a student. I'm a graduate. And my stepmother's mother is also a Utah State Aggie graduate. Um, the next phase of my life that I want to talk to is from the musical Dear Evan Hansen, and the song is Waving Through a Window. The lyrics go, I've learned to slam on the brake before I even turn the key, before I make the mistake, before I lead with the worst of me. So this is where I began my time at Utah State. I was so set on not acting on my same sex attraction that I wouldn't even allow myself to begin to look. I wouldn't even begin to allow myself to be too close to any man. I convinced myself that going to the temple twice a week was going to help me overcome my sexuality. I was serving in an elders quorum presidency at the time, and my entire life was school, church, and trying to date women. During that time, I had a very dear friend of mine that I began to develop feelings for. Um, and when he got engaged, my entire life began to crumble. And so the next part of the song, on the outside, always looking in. Will I ever be more than I've always been? Because I'm tapping on the glass, waving through a window. I try to speak, but nobody can hear. So I wait around for an answer to appear while I'm watching people pass, waving through a window. Oh, can anybody see? Is anybody waving back at me? Um, During that time, as everything began to fall apart, I turned to my first bishop since my mission and began to talk about my sexuality, and was encouraged to go to the church's addiction recovery program. I also began to go to a local therapist who, while not specifically a conversion therapy therapist, did try to help me by giving me literature in a hope that it could potentially serve as conversion therapy. After several years of going through that, it became very clear that nothing was ever going to change. Um, Going to the church's addiction recovery program, I met what eventually became my first boyfriend. Um, Out of respect, I will not use his name. But he and I met at these meetings and became one another's best friend. About 2 weeks into our connection with one another, we professed our feelings to one another. And before too long, we did everything together. Um, I often chuckle calling him my boyfriend because this was a very platonic boyfriend. Other than having feelings for one another and telling each other that we loved each other, we never even held hands. We would feel guilty if we hugged for too long. And we did nothing wrong, but we were both constantly running away from how we felt. After 9 months together, I finally approached him and said, I can't do this anymore. I want to actually take you on a date, and I want to actually be able to date you and tell people you're my boyfriend. He was in a different place, and I cannot blame him for where he was, but he chose to say that unfortunately he was choosing the church and he could not act on those feelings. This was too painful for me, and that was for me where I had to cut the relationship off. Um, I had never been so happy in my life as when I was with him, and I had never felt heartbreak so deep as when he and I went our separate ways. Similarly, not very long after that was when I discovered North Star. For anyone who has um, interacted with North Star is a queer LDS organization that encourages people to not act on their feelings and to stay active in the church. I was actively a part of the North Star community for around 3 to 6 months before I chose to step away from North Star and began to give myself permission to date. The next section that I would like to introduce is from the musical Into the Woods, the song No One Is Alone. The lyrics go, Mother cannot guide you, now you're on your own. Only me beside you, still you're not alone. No one is alone, truly, no one is alone. I wish, I know. Um, Around that time, I began to realize that it was important for me to come out publicly. I began to date, I began to tell people that I was gay. Um, my family, so I came out to my parents while I was on my LDS mission. About halfway through my mission, it became very clear that I was being prompted by the Spirit to tell my parents. So on preparation day, I sent an email to my four parents. As soon as I had pressed the send button, I turned my computer off. And for an entire week, I had
Oh
no
my
idea.
gosh.
um, that next week, when I turned the computer on, I was fasting. I was scared out of my mind. My poor companion had no idea what was going on. All he knew is I was a nervous wreck. And when I opened my computer, I had four emails, one from my mom, one from my dad, one from my stepmom, and one from my stepdad. All four took time to send me a separate email and let me know that they loved me and that we were going to figure this out. When I came home from my mission, the journey began. And I want to give a shout out to all four of my parents, just how gracefully they've handled this time and how much each of them have grown and how much each of them have supported me has been insurmountable. Um, After that, like I said, I began to come out more publicly after being home from my mission for a few years. Um, and I posted on social media and I began to tell people. The thing that makes me laugh the hardest, I have a cousin. Her name is Kelly, and Kelly probably gave me my favorite response. She looked at me and said, "Sweetie, I knew when you started using my high heels when you were 6 years old and wanted to pretend to be Sandy from Grease." And Kelly put that perfectly. Blake was going to be Blake no matter what happened in life. And again, musical theater is who I am. Um, the next section I really want to talk about um, is specifically what I like to call my angry time period. The musical Wicked very perfectly um, encapsulated how I felt in Alphaba's song "No Good Deed." Alphaba sings, "No good deed goes unpunished. No act of charity goes unresented. No good deed goes unpunished. That's my new creed. My road of good intentions led where such roads always lead. No good deed goes unpunished." I want to give a shout out to the bishops that I had who did a wonderful job, whilst also being honest about bishops who caused a lot of pain. One of the most painful bishops I encountered said to me when I first came out to him, "Well, my parents died when I was 3 years old, and I was raised by my grandparents. We all go through painful things. Get over it."
Ouch.
I was very upset and very hurt. While I can't imagine the pain he must have experienced losing his parents so young, losing a parent and dealing with sexuality are not the same thing. And for me at that time, that was a very painful time. Um, the next big conversation piece that I want to talk about is the infamous Jeffrey R. Holland BYU address, Musket Fire. Um, Elder Holland was always an apostle that I admired very deeply. He was kind of the kind, graceful apostle. And when he spoke at BYU and specifically called out people for supporting LGBT individuals and negatively spoke about the queer community, um, I was deeply hurt. I spiraled, and it felt like a giant slap in the face, like I was being told I didn't belong. And while I do not believe that Jeffrey R. Holland gave that talk with ill intentions, I believe it was entirely meant to remind BYU faculty and staff that there was a certain thing that they needed to live up to. That talk felt like an apostle specifically condemning people that are gay. And that was a very angry time for me. Around this same time period, I was in a singles ward where marriage became the number one area of conversation. And marriage became the focus, marriage became the most important thing. And I could not handle it. So I wanted to read a letter that I wrote during that time to the stake presidency I was in. I said, "Dear stake presidency, my name is Blake Muir, and I am in such and such a ward. I am really glad you reached out as a stakes presidency to each of us at this time. A little about myself. I am a senior at Utah State studying sociology. I love the ward I am in. Bishop so and so is the most loving and supportive bishop. I am also a gay member of this church. I wanted to send this email to share my thoughts and also to hopefully help you see where I am coming from. I was born and raised a member of this church. I remember so clearly the night I received a testimony of the Book of Mormon. When I was 13 years old, I served in numerous callings. I served a full-time mission in Denver, Colorado, was a regular temple, what was a regular temple attendant, and the list could go on and on. My journey and the Lord led me to come out in 2018. I was terrified, and it was the most difficult decision I ever made. Since my coming out, I have been on a much healthier and positive track in regards to my mental health. However, as you and I are well aware, this has been a time of extreme difficulty for queer members of the church. I am one of 3 openly gay men in my ward, and I promise you there are more who do not feel safe to be open. A few short weeks ago, when our ward had a ward conference and you each came to speak, I got up and walked out of the elders' quorum. The lesson was too painful. I plead with you to stop shoving marriage down our throats. I swear to you that there is no single person in our stake who does not wish they were already married. That is all we hear about. And what is more, for those of us who are LGBTQIA, we know we will not have those blessings. Each time marriage is talked about, I am reminded I will never have a temple marriage. I will never be able to be a full part, or I will never be able to be a full part of the church unless I go against God's teachings. It is not good for man to be alone. I have found my peace dating men. I knelt down and told my maker that I had done everything I knew how to do to make it work with a woman, and it was not going to happen. What is more, I spent countless hours in the temple pleading with God to take this away from me, and he made it very clear that it is not going to change. For many others in the stake, not being married has nothing to do with lack of trying. For whatever reason, they are just not married at this time. There is a culture in the church that the members who are married are somehow better than the people who are not. This is just not the case. I do not support and know, or I do support and know that each of you have experience and have much you can share with us. But having us take time in an elders quorum lesson to ask you questions about marriage honestly feels like a joke. I'm glad you each have successful marriages, and I know every single one of us in the stake want that. But stop acting like it is the only thing that matters. As our stake presidency, I ask that you take the time to bring us unto Christ. Help us strengthen our testimony. Help us understand the scriptures. Help us to become the best versions of ourselves. Your calling is not to help us get married, but to help us come unto Christ. I know this message is a lot, but I feel very strongly I need to say something. Um, this was a very emotional letter for me to send. What made it even more frustrating was 2 weeks later, I was brought into my bishop's office and asked if we needed to have a church disciplinary council.
Wow.
Um, I wasn't expecting an apology. I wasn't expecting anything profound. But to have the response be not being listened to by the stake presidency, and then to be asked by my bishop if we needed to have a disciplinary council, just felt like an even bigger slap in the face. For this time, this was where I began to step away from church and really began to feel for myself that part of finding myself was going to involve forming a relationship with God that was not going to be dictated by church. You said it perfectly at the beginning of this interview. I have not closed the idea of ever going back to church off completely. I believe that there is a possibility that maybe someday church will be on my radar again. While at this point in time, my number one focus has become how do I have a relationship with God and learn how to love myself. One of or well the one of the great commandments from the Lord is love thy neighbor as thyself and love the Lord thy God. I believe part of loving ourselves is learning how to love God and learning how to love ourselves. And that has become my own specific area of focus. So the next song that I want to introduce, it is called "The Melody Within," and it's by Kurt Bester. It comes from a film called Rigoletto. For anyone who's not familiar with Rigoletto, it was a Utah-made Phantom of the Opera meets Beauty and the Beast type story about a man who is a composer and who is cursed with a deformed face and finds a young woman who must love him in a platonic way, not a romantic way, to help him break the curse. The song that I guess I feel really represents learning to love yourself and learning to love your life is called "The Melody Within." The lyrics go, "Music boxes have within melodies they carry with them. Once they open, music fills the air. Every person you have known has a song of their own. Once they open up, you'll hear what's there. It's not easy. You must listen with your heart for what lies hidden. There was a melody locked deep inside of me, but now it's free. It found a place embraced by harmony, sweet harmony. Love more than anything teaches our hearts to sing. Only love could break the spell. Now I know very well the love within myself." This specifically really spoke to me, I think, because um, the great commandment of um, we know the great commandment of um, the two great commandments are love the Lord your God and love thy neighbor as thyself. I think one of the most important parts of that commandment is the love ourself as well. How can we love our neighbor if we don't love ourselves? And I realized that learning how to love myself and learning how to embrace myself meant for me at that time that I was going to need to step away from church for a while and step away from the negative ways I was taught to have a relationship with God. Um, so often I felt like my own personal journey taught me to fear God and to fear religion and to fear sin. And I've come to really realize just how important it is to allow yourself grace and allow yourself to find who you are and to love yourself, and that no two plans are going to look exactly the same. I think that God has a plan that we don't understand for his queer children. And I think stepping away from the harmful dialogue of queer people are going to be fixed and there's something inherently wrong with them, I think stepping away from that dialogue and really learning how to love ourselves becomes important. Um, I was slightly incorrect when I said that this was my last song. I have one more song that I do want to share because I think it perfectly encapsulates learning how to have a relationship with God and also learning how to have a relationship with ourselves. Um, I actually just discovered Jesus Christ Superstar recently. And it was funny. Growing up, I assumed Jesus Christ Superstar was a blasphemous play and was very sacrilegious and inappropriate. And so discovering it as an adult, I really connected with Mary Magdalene's song in the play "I Don't Know How to Love Him." Um, in this play, we are invited to view Mary Magdalene as a prostitute. And while there is no evidence that that was real for Mary Magdalene, it is a dialogue piece that for a lot of years was accepted. And so the lyrics go, Mary is questioning how to love our Savior Jesus Christ. And the lyrics go, "I don't know how to love him, what to do, how to move him. I've been changed, yes, really changed in these past few days. When I've seen myself, I seem like someone else." Um, I think that Mary's pleas of trying to learn how to love our Savior can mirror our own because I think we often, I feel like as humans, don't know what it means to truly convert to God And I think that for many years in my own personal journey, I was afraid of losing myself um, in finding God. And I think in some ways I was afraid of losing my queerness, and I was afraid of losing my kindness and my other things to be able to devote myself fully to God. The next part of the song that I want to share is, I don't know how to take this. I don't see why he moves me. He's a man. He's just a man. And I've had so many men before. In very many ways, he's just one more. Um, do we allow ourselves to love God? Do we allow ourselves to be ourselves and let God love us? I feel in these last few years like I am learning that despite what I believed for so many years, that I was broken and that there was something wrong with me, that God loves me the way I am, and that I don't have to change for God to love me. The final part of this song that I want to share is, yet if he said he loved me, I'd be lost, I'd be frightened. I couldn't cope, just couldn't cope. I'd turn my head, I'd back away, I wouldn't want to know. He scares me so, I want him so, I love him so. I want to present a question that was recently brought to my mind. What if each of us are just afraid of God's all encompassing love? I have recently become a big fan of the podcast, The Gospel of Musical Theater. It is run by two Episcopal priests that are musical theater lovers like myself. Both of these men are queer and are whatever the proper terminology is for over a specific parish of the Episcopal Church. And when they talked about that specific part of the song, they brought up this idea of, are we afraid to love God? And are we too afraid of God's love? And I think part of learning how to accept myself as a queer man has also involved me being allowing God to love me as a queer man. I think so often the dialogue, specifically around being queer, is that God loves us in spite of our sexuality. What if it's that God loves us because of our sexuality? And what if it's that God loves us because of who we are? Um, Mary Magdalene in this play has become my favorite character, I think, because she forces us to question God's love from a point of being imperfect. And I think that that is not specific to queer people, because I think there's nothing wrong with us. I think it's more that we as human beings need to learn how to accept God's love and not limit God's love. And so I hope that sharing my story today and sharing my thoughts can help some people, and can remind all of us that we are on a never ending journey, that this life will go into the eternities, and that um, we are all worthy of God's love.
Blake, thank you. Thank you from everybody listening that is deeply moved by your story. No one has ever framed up their story in this creative, unique way, with all these beautiful songs and the lyric songs, and then telling your story. I'm going to come back to that in a second. There's just a few things, listeners, I kind of write down things. This song, Waving Through the Window, on the outside, I was looking in, I will ever be more than I've been, because I tap, tap, tap on the glass, waving through the window. I try to speak, but no one can hear. So I wait around for an answer while I watch people pass. Wow. It reminds me of Jacob Guy, who came on the podcast and talked about gay Latter-day Saint being locked out of the house and looking in the windows and seeing all those straight couples getting on with their life, the proclamation, the family in the background, and all the beauty of that. And he wanted that. He tried to unlock that door over and over and over again because he wanted that. And eventually they closed the blinds and didn't want to deal with the dissidence of seeing Jacob on the porch, and sort of was fine with him walking away to some extent. And it just reminded me of what he shared that was really eye-opening to me to better understand how you feel. And the lyrics of this song are terrific. The letter from the stake prison is excellent. I just love that you wrote it. I'm sorry. There wasn't the kind of response that I think a mature, thoughtful, healthy church organization should be able to handle, that we are grateful for input. We look for input. It helps us to do better. And and then it sort of resulted in potential church discipline. But you also give grace. No, I was going to say in the end of the letter, you actually, instead of just saying what wasn't right, you actually gave a suggestion on what to do. And I hope listeners got that. I'm going to reread that because it's a simple invitation that I deeply agree with. As our stake prisoners, I ask that you take time to bring us into Christ. Help us strengthen our testimony. Help us understand the scriptures. Help us become the best version of ourselves. Your calling is not to get us married, but to help us come into Christ. I so deeply believe in what you invited that stake presidency to do in that stake. And that, listeners, I'm in a YSA ward with my wife. I've mentioned that. And our bishop, one guy just talked to me after his first interview. He said, he's not married, and it's an older ward, 26 to 35. And he said he's the first YSA bishop that's never brought up marriage in a meeting with him. And he's never talked about the pulpit. In fact, he actually tells the ward members over the pulpit he's not going to talk about it. For the very reasons you would say, Blake. He's figured that out. He loves being married. And he's not taking that away, but he just recognizes everybody knows that, and he wants people to come into Christ. His testimonies are just what you invited this stake presidency. He just walks the walk that you've invited us to do. And it's beautiful. My wife and I love being in that YSA ward and seeing us. It's good for me and my wife, and seeing us, the focus to come unto Christ. And the church is a means to that. Sometimes I think the goal is to get people to come unto the church. The church is not an eternal organization. Our relationship with Christ is. And the church is a means to that. And sometimes I think we over-elevate the church and the importance of our relationship with the church. But to me, it's a means to the end. And it can be really a good means for some people and really difficult. I'd love to, listeners, just if you have time, Blake, I'd love to share 3 songs that are important to me.
Please.
And I won't sing them because I can't sing. The first one, and these are kind of 3 different areas. The first song is the song that's sort of my call to be an ally. It's called "I'll Go Where You Want Me to Go, Dear Lord." And I see if it may not be on the mountain high or over the stormy sea. It may not be at the battle's front. My Lord will have need of me. But if by a still small voice he calls to paths that I do not know, I'll answer, dear Lord, with my hand in thine. I'll go where you want me to go. And that's the song that got me on my mission to Northern England. And that's the song that minted me as an ally as my YSA bishop assignment was ending. And to paths that I do not know, I did not have any idea how to be an ally. And 10 years ago, this month is really when it set in with the suicide of Stockton Powers, a gay Latter-day Saint in Davis County, and his mother posting about that on Instagram. And I just like Blake, we're both trying to follow God, have a relationship with God, follow Christ, and walk paths there's no owner's manual for Blake to be a gay Latter-day Saint. He's writing his story as it comes, and that's sort of what I felt as an ally. The next song I love is my job as an ally is I can't sing any songs. My wife knows that. I love music though. It's interesting you can love music and not have musical talent. Um, Bridge Over Troubled Water is in these words I'm going to read, because this is my goal as an ally, is to get out of the way and let queer people like Blake shine. Now I'm getting emotional. This is sail on, silver girl, sail on by. Your time has come to shine. All your dreams are on the way. See how they shine. If you need a friend, I'm sitting right behind you, like a bridge over troubled water that you know very well, Blake. I will ease your mind like a bridge over troubled water. So I've always felt, and some of this was learning from people in my early years, that the job as an ally is to get out of the way and let Blake shine, but not to leave, but to hopefully Blake, and this is Blake's parents that are doing this, and people love Blake, and they're sitting right behind. When the times get tough, they're going to be stone catchers. When Elder Holland gives a different talk, we're going to try to do everything we can to help support our queer friends. The third song I'd like to share is an oldie, 1972. Do you know this song, Blake? The Man of La Mancha, Dream the Impossible Dream? I'll bet you do.
It is a phenomenal piece. Love that song very, very much.
Is that part of a play? I didn't even know where this song comes from. Do you know? Is it part of a play, or is it just a one-off song?
The Impossible Dream from the Man from La Mancha is it's a play, a musical, and I believe it's originally based off of, if I'm remembering correctly, I think it's an opera.
Wow.
And the story follows a knight who is a little bit senile, and a little bit not aware of the world he lives in. And what makes that story such a beautiful story is you're dealing with your protagonist who is a little delusional, whilst also having the most incredible dream of how the world can be. And it is a very beautiful story, and a very underrated musical, I might add.
Here, the first time in 900 plus episodes, I'm bringing up this song for the perfect guest that can give us a backstory on it. And I hope this is sort of an impossible dream right now. This is how I hope for queer people. This is what I hope is the possible dream someday. To dream and the dream is full inclusion for you, Blake, that the church at some point, I'm not sort of an activist saying we got to change our doctrine, but I'm open to doctrinal changes because there's so much pain. And I've always wondered if we'll eventually settle on that what the core gospel truth here and principle is monogamy. And God has created queer people and straight people, and we want to have plans for them to find monogamous, healthy relationships. And we're going to be kind of neutral on this. You've got to figure out your sexual orientation before you get married. And then we have paths for you. A mixed orientation marriage like Thai is a valid path. A same-sex marriage is a valid path. A straight marriage for straight people, they're probably going to marry straight people if they're straight, is a valid path. And we're going to support all of those. So that's honestly the impossible dream I have. And but I'll read these lyrics. To dream the impossible dream, to fight the unbeatable foe, to bear the unbearable sorrow, and that's the sorrow that I feel with queer people. To run where the brave not go, and that's a little bit of trying to do as an ally, but the queer people are leading the way. To right the unrightable wrong. There's been so much wrong for queer people. And we've got to reconcile that. We've got to apologize. We've got to own our past. We've got to unteach things we've taught, and we've got to heal our relationship with queer people. To love pure and chase from afar, to try when your arms are too weary, to reach the unreachable star. That is my quest, to follow that star, no matter how hopeless, no matter how far. To fight for the right without question or cause, to be willing to march into hell for a heavenly cause. And that's my allyship song. This is a heavenly cause, because Blake, using his own words, allowing God to love me as a queer man. And then you said that's the end of the song, listeners. I'm going back to some of Blake's words. and I love this. I was worried. I'm paraphrasing, but you have this line I wrote down: "Didn't want to lose my queerness." Isn't that a great place to be? This recognition, that's not a word. The realization is that Blake is created as intended, and that his queerness is divine, and he doesn't want this carved out of him. That he recognizes all of his spiritual gifts and attributes or goodness are all tied in this, and it's a beautiful divine creation. You're just a sectional minority. God just chose to make less people queer than straight, and we sort of need to figure that out and realize that's just God's plan, and it's a beautiful plan, and we can embrace and love Blake. And he's obviously no threat to our children and no threat to society. In fact, our society's better off with good men like Blake. So I'm just deeply moved by your story and all the work you've done through decade. This is 20 years on this road to be the man you are, and to have this deep self-acceptance, and to be able to deconstruct your relationship with the church and continue and reconstruct your relationship with God. Not everybody can do that, but you've done that, and I think it helps those that may not feel the church is their best path to hear your story and say, well, maybe God can still walk with me, even though I'm not going to church. And maybe this period of time in my life is helpful. Maybe I'll return to church someday once I can have a healthier relationship with God and myself. But maybe not. And that's fine. We're kind of neutral on these paths on this podcast, and just trying to support queer people where they are and what they feel their best path forward is.
Richard, if I might
more
add to
thoughts.
that,
yeah, I'm ready for you to share anything you'd love to share.
Please. I love how you put that so much. And I just want to reiterate that with you as well, how important I believe it is to know that faith does not always equal the same thing. I really, over the years, have began to realize one of the most beautiful things about faith is that it can look however we need it to look. I believe the most important thing that each of us can do in our own faith journeys is give ourselves the grace to give the space that it needs. Whether my faith right now means that I'm going to go and talk to a tree, or whether that means that I am going to go see a play to feel closer to God, or whether that means I'm going to go to church every Sunday. All of these means of faith are valid. And just like you said earlier, no matter what form of marriage we're looking at, that's valid. And I also want to just reiterate, I think any faith journey is valid. And I think I believe that there is a God who wants to help us and wants to be there with us, and that can look any way we want it to. And that is the God that I choose to believe in now, because it feels right to me and it feels real to me. And I believe that that is the God that is real and exists.
I'm with you. And I love part of the theme you share is I think we do better when we're coming to God, not from a point of brokenness, but sometimes, and just from a position of strength. I think God loves all of us, and sometimes we feel broken because of sexual orientation. Obviously, we shouldn't. And sometimes we feel we've sinned, and so God doesn't love us. But I think either of those two buckets, God still loves us, and He doesn't want us to see us as broken. He wants to be involved in our lives and just know that we're on a mortal journey. You're a really good man, Blake. You're very spiritually mature, emotionally mature. This is a future dissertation, but I've wondered if sometimes queer Latter-day Saints sort of don't get all the answers from the bishop. Well, I certainly didn't have the answers to the queer Latter-day Saints that talked to me about being queer. So sometimes I wonder if this relationship with God you do a better job at because you just don't have the institutional answers. And I don't know if that's true or not. It feels like it's true in your case. And so you've done what the church has always invited us to do, is turn to God, hear Him, author your own story. And you've just done such a great job, and the rest of your life, you've got this foundation for the rest of your life to be possible. I know we talked earlier, you're not in a relationship, you're not dating anybody seriously right now, but if you find him, you're your personal best to find him. I really believe that it'd be a great time to find him. But I don't want to be your talk about marriage to you on the podcast because we've already talked about that. I'm not going to make that mistake, but I'll just say that, you're your best self right now, and it's a great time to do the podcast. And if he comes into your life right now, that'd be a great time.
Absolutely. I am a helpless romantic who believes in fairy tales and believes in true love. And I believe that those things are real. And I think for whatever reason that hasn't happened for me yet, but that it is coming. And when it does come, it'll be wonderful. And that is the message I also think that we need to hear more and more, is that when love does happen, it is the exact time it is meant to happen.
That's great. Anything you'd like to say in closing?
If that is okay, I actually have one last little lyric that I want to share.
Good.
You read The Impossible Dream, and my impossible dream that I want to share. The song that I like to believe is the national anthem of being a queer human being. Somewhere Over the Rainbow, from The Wizard of Oz. The lyrics go, somewhere over the rainbow, way up high, there's a land that I've heard of once in a lullaby. Somewhere over the rainbow, skies are blue, and the dreams that you dare to dream really do come true. Someday I'll wish upon a star and wake up where the clouds are far behind me, where troubles melt like lemon drops away above the chimney tops. That's where you'll find me. Somewhere over the rainbow, bluebirds fly. Birds fly over the rainbow. Why then, oh, why can't I? To everyone listening to this podcast, I believe that we all have a future over the rainbow, and that in each of our journeys, that there is a maker who cares about us and who loves us exactly the way we are. And all each of us needs to do is just be patient and learn how to love ourselves and learn that we are exactly who we're meant to be. And that comparison is the death of joy. You are valid, you are seen. And I just want everyone to know that I am grateful for the man that I am today, and that things do get better. And sometimes even when things feel awful, there is a light at the end of the tunnel. And I promise that it is worth it.
Thank you, Blake Muir. This is Richard Osler and Blake Muir signing off from another episode of Listen, Learn, and Love.